The first thing that you do if you're using a recipe is read through the entire recipe, because you want to make sure that you get the helpful information to start with right off the bat. And so first and foremost, I know that I needed to preheat my oven, which I've already done, to 425. We're going to be really roasting this chicken for just a short amount of time. This is a really nice, fast, easy, delicious dinner. And I wanted to make sure that the chicken thighs were washed and dried really well. So I did that earlier so that they could air dry. And you wanted to do that so you get a really nice caramelization when the skin hits the skillet. I'm using skin on chicken thighs. There's a note on the bottom of this recipe when you get it. You can make this with chicken breast. You can make it with chicken legs. You can make this with a completely different animal if you want to. You can completely swap the vegetables that I'm using. I happen to find fennel. It wasn't that hard because I think most people don't know what it is. So there's plenty of it at the store. Some of the other things, if you need to swap out, then just use your other favorite vegetables. It kind of doesn't hurt any changes that you need to make. And I'm using Orzo pasta, which is that kind of little small grain pasta that looks a little bit like rice. It's often found in rice pilaf mixes. I have that. I thought it would be delicious, and it goes along with this recipe really well. So you can use rice, you can use farro, you can use any other kind of grain, and there's probably better nutritional value to some of those, but pasta is not going to kill you if you have it a little bit once in a while, I think, especially if you get some whole grain stuff, right, Amy? That would be a better choice.
Yeah, so whole grains are great, but occasional having some orzo or something is also good. I like it because it cooks fast, faster than like a brown rice, so that's really nice. And I like the taste of the chicken thighs, right? The dark chicken. It's a little higher in fat, but it also has more zinc than like a chicken breast. And so I know a lot of people are concerned about immune health right now with the COVID virus going around, and zinc is one of those nutrients that's super important for immunity. So way to go, Julia, picking the dark meat chicken tonight.
Awesome. I tend to go with it. Yeah, it was one of the earliest lessons I learned in culinary school, that fat is flavor. You don't have to necessarily be afraid of all fats. You just need to use it right and use the right ones. And so that's what I'm trying to do. So I'm going to walk you through the basic ingredients and then equipment, and then I'm going to get started. And if anybody does have any issues with seeing anything or hearing anything, just go ahead and chat it in the box and let us know. I've got my cleaned off dried chicken thighs. I've got carrot, celery. They were even washed. Same with the fennel. I'm not going to peel the carrot. I don't normally do that unless there's a really bad blemish on it. I just make sure that it's washed and scrubbed with a vegetable brush. The more you remove from the outside of most vegetables, the more of the good stuff you're taking away, I've learned. So carrot, celery, fennel, onion. I've got my paprika, some dried herbs that I love. You can use any medley of herbs or seasonings that you like, but paprika, dried herbs, salt and pepper are a really good solid combination that go with all of these flavors. Got some organic, that's what they had, low sodium chicken stock. I've got a little bit of white wine in this hilarious tiny bottle from the liquor store, because it's also what I could find. Seems there's been a run on wine at the grocery store. I've got some washed parsley, and that's it. Those are the ingredients. It's really a basic recipe. And the orzo, like I said, you can swap a lot of that out. Over here, basic equipment. I'm going to be using my large cast iron skillet tonight. I recommend cast iron if you have it. It conducts heat better. It works from stove to oven and then back really well. And you get a little tiny bit more iron in your food.
Yeah. That's why I like to use mine.
Yeah,
more iron.
So it's not like an urban myth. You actually can get a tiny bit of good iron from cooking in these, right?
Yes, especially if there's something acidic. So like a tomato sauce in there.
Yeah, we'll put a little of that lemon in at the end, so that'll really help. I've got a platter. We need that, so after the chicken is done cooking, we're going to set the chicken aside and keep cooking in the same pan. I like to do things with as little dishes as possible, one pan all night. I've got my handy thermometer, because we want to be safe, and whenever we're cooking chicken, we want to make sure that we take it to 165 degrees. If you don't have a thermometer at home, then You want to cut into it and make sure that the fibers of the muscle look stringy and not still raw. You want to make sure that any juices are running clear, not pink. Sometimes with thighs, if you cut too close to the bone, it can look a little scary, it can look a little pink, but that's usually just because it's very close to the bone. You want to cut into the meatier section, and that's when you can tell that it's done. I've got a microplane. We're going to be zesting some lemon later. Again, if you don't have that, there's other kinds of zesters. You can use a peeler and then chop up the peel with your knife. That works perfectly fine. I've got a spatula, which I'm going to use to stir things. You want to make sure that if you're using silicone, it's rated for high heat. If you don't make sure that it's rated for high heat, you're going to have disgusting melted silicone in your very hot skillet, so watch out for that. Tongs, chef's best friend. A couple of spoons for tasting, measuring cup for some of that wine later, and I've got my olive oil for cooking. I always get everything out before I start. When you have everything ready, then when you start cooking, the cooking process is really fun and really easy, and then cleanup is actually a lot simpler too because you've already organized everything in such a way. So the first thing that we do with this recipe, I'm going to go ahead and dive in unless anyone had any questions before I start. Cool. I am wearing gloves because I'm going to be working with this raw chicken. If you're cooking for your family and you're concerned about any of the packaging that you got, like we've been instructed, it might be smart to wipe down packages if you got them from the store, which I've already done. The veggies, like I said, were already washed. I just personally like wearing gloves when I work with raw chicken because it's gross. So I'm going to season the chicken and I'm going to get that searing. That's the first part of the recipe we want to get going because that needs to get into the oven. One of the things that you can kind of judge if a recipe isn't written very well, you want to read all the way through it, like I said, because then you can figure out what you want to do first. I'm doing this first so that I can get it in the oven. I know it's going to be in the oven for about 15 minutes. While that's in the oven, then I can cut my fennel and onion and saute all that stuff. And then everything comes together at the end. So the chicken goes first. All I'm doing is a pinch of salt and pepper. I'm raining it all over the top. I've got my paprika, like I said. And these dried herbs, which I love. These are just dried fiend herbs. I got them actually from a restaurant that I went to. Italian dried herbs are just like your dried thyme or any medley that you like would be fine. So I want to kind of use one hand as my clean hand and one hand as my raw chicken hand, and then I'm going to flip these over. I want to get seasoning on both sides. That's key. It won't really soak all the way through if you just put it in on the top, but if you make sure to coat it all the way around, you get a lot more of the love spread throughout your dish. A little bit more of this. And then I'm just kind of patting it to spread it out with my hands a little bit to get it to stick on. Okay, so I want to get this skillet going. I'm going to get that on pretty high. It's going to take a minute to get hot. And so when you're sauteing or searing anything, this is the fun trick. You want to ha-ha your pan. I think Mina is here. She's heard me say this a lot. Hi, Mina. Mina was one of my amazing kitchen assistants, and I'm sad that she can't be right here with me today. So you ha-ha your pan, which is heat the pan, add the oil, heat the oil, add the food. So if I added my oil to a cold pan, it would take a really long time to heat up, and it kind of wouldn't cook the same. Then again, if I added my food to really cold oil after it first goes into the pan, it's not going to create that really nice sizzle and sear that we're looking for. So whenever you're sauteing anything, you heat the pan up first, then you add the oil or the cooking fat or whatever you're using, butter, coconut oil, whatever it's called. Sorry. And I'm just doing about a tablespoon of this. You don't need very much because chicken thighs have a good amount of their own fat in the skin, and we're going to definitely go skin side down. You always want to do that presentation side down when you're cooking a piece of fish or chicken or meat. Even if it's the skinless chicken breast, that top part would be your presentation side. So you sear that side first so that it looks the best, and then when you present it to yourself on your plate, it's gorgeous and you're happy and you feel good about your food. So I'm just gonna make sure this oil is spread all the way out in the pan. Nice and well coated. And you can start to tell when the oil is hot enough. It starts to move away from the center, pull to the side, create like these, I call them swirlies, these kind of like little swirly lines in the oil. It's starting to look like it's getting pretty hot. The other way to tell is to just get a drop of water on your hand and sprinkle it in there. And if you get a little sizzle, then you know it's getting nice and hot, and you know that it's gonna sear well when you put your food into it. So I'm gonna put this chicken in, like I said, skin side down.
You can hear that nice sizzle.
Oh, good. Okay, now both of these have had raw chicken all over them, so I'm gonna immediately just put them away. I don't wanna make the mistake of using them again. So I will use the tongs to flip, and then I'm gonna, just want to be really conscientious about that cross-contamination. If I were to finish this chicken in the oven and then pull it out and use those raw tongs, that would be a mistake. So in the cooking process, it's fine, but then once you're about to use your finished chicken and it's in the safety zone, you don't want to use those raw tongs again. So that's just something that you're keeping in mind while you're cooking with chicken, which can be the most amazing blank canvas for food, but is a safety issue for, you want to just be careful and knowledgeable about what you're doing. So this is still on a really high heat. I want this to sear hard. I want to get it a really good caramelization on this skin side. And then we're going to flip it and put it in the oven, and then it's going to finish cooking on the other side. We don't need to get a gorgeous sear on the underbelly. We're not really going to be looking at that for presentation. Plus, while it's in the oven at 425 degrees in a cast iron skillet, it will sear on the bottom. So it's going to get a good caramelization meanwhile. But this gives it that really beautiful crust, and then it finishes in the oven. While that is going to go into the oven, like I said, we're going to prep our veggies. So we have a carrot that I'm going to dice, celery that I'm going to dice, fennel and onion that I'm going to slice, and garlic that I'm going to slice. All of those things are then going to eventually be sauteed in this exact same pan. Then the orzo is going to cook in the exact same pan with the veggies, and we're cooking that sort of risotto style. I'll explain that later on.
I love the one pot cooking. It just cuts back a lot on the cleanup.
Yes, yes. Now, and I'm just cooking for me. I'm only one person, but you saw I've got 3 pretty large chicken thighs in here, so that's 3 dinners for me. If you're cooking for a family, you can maybe choose smaller thighs or legs, and you can cook a lot more pieces, or make a medley of both. And you can make leftovers from the chicken. You don't even have to just serve it the same way. You then have cooked chicken ready to go for other meals you can make through the week if you make like a larger batch of this. So a lot of people have this fear of messing with their food. And rightly so, when you first start sauteing something, you don't want to lift it up and look at it immediately, because that's going to ruin your contact. But after it's been in here for a little while, you're not going to mess up the entire process if you just take a little peek. The only way for you to know how well it's doing is by looking at it. So I'm just going to lift up one of the sides and corners of one of these breasts. You can tell that it's getting a good crust on it. But I'm going to leave it for just another couple of minutes. Another way that you can tell when it's got a really good sear on it and it's probably ready to flip is when it releases really well on its own, and you barely have to kind of pull it. You don't have to dig at it with a spatula. You shouldn't have to do that. When it releases by itself, that means that the fats on the surface have broken down, and what is that called? Oh, I'll think of it. Anyway, so they're no longer trying to stick. So they've melted away, and then it releases by itself a lot easier. So if you're trying to remove it and it's still sticking really badly, then it just might not be ready yet.
That's good information. Yeah, and the chicken is a great source of protein for this dish. And as I mentioned, the zinc, both of those things, protein and zinc, both really important for immune.
Chicken thighs make a lot more fat. They cook out a lot more fat than they would if you were using a chicken breast per se. So depending on which variety of this recipe that you make for yourself, you might need to use a tiny bit more olive oil, or later in the process when it's time to cook the vegetables, you might need to add maybe a teaspoon more of the olive oil, just because the fat content hasn't cooked into the pan, because we're going to be using some of this chicken fat to then cook the rest of the food. So if you're doing the lighter version of that with the chicken breast, it's going to be still just as delicious. Just think about using a tiny, tiny bit more olive oil to saute the vegetables so that you still have, like, you're not going to stick and burn everything, but the breasts just don't have the same content, fat content of the chicken thighs. So I'm getting a pretty good, nice, crispy crust on there. I don't know, can you guys see the color? They're pulling away easily on their own. And I do know that they're going to continue to cook in the oven. So at this point, I'm going to flip them over. And very, very carefully put them in the oven. Okay, like I said, that oven is at 425 degrees, and the rack is right in the middle. It shouldn't be too close to the bottom or too close to the top. That gets hot, and either the bottom or the top of your chicken might burn. So right in the middle will give it a good, consistent heat all the way through, especially since we're using cast iron. It's going to be really nice and hot in that oven. So it only takes about 10 to 15 minutes, depending on the size of your chicken or what piece you're using. If you're using white meat, it's going to take a lot less time. White meat cooks faster than dark meat, well, boneless especially, and it just has less fat. It cooks a lot faster. So you might even only need about 8 minutes if it's a chicken breast, if you have it in an oven this hot. But you're looking for the same finish temperature. You're looking for 165 and the same details of finish, that the muscle tendon, the fibers pull away from each other, more like string, like you can make pulled barbecue kind of chicken from it, rather than raw meat that doesn't string away from each other. And the juices need to be clear. So those are the really important things you're looking for to make sure any cut of chicken is done, whether you're using white meat or dark meat. I'm going to set my timer just for 10 minutes. I know that I said about 10 to 15, and because I don't know exactly, I'm going to check on the lower side of that scale. If I checked at 15 and they were done at 10, I've ruined everything. So you want to look at the lower end of the time frame just to give it a check. I also always want to think about kind of rotating the position of whatever I'm cooking in the oven. One side of my oven is a lot hotter than the other, and it's a lot hotter closer to the door than it is to the back. That's because the heat's trying to get out. So moving your food around just helps make sure that you're getting nice consistent color and cooking on all the different pieces of food that are in there.
So Julia, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
When you cook with chicken breasts, oftentimes they're really thick and uneven even. Do you usually pound them out so they're kind of similar in size and thickness?
You know, that's one way of doing it, and that's a really good way of doing it. It depends on the size of the chicken breast that you get. Sometimes if you pound it out, then you're left with something that looks like pork schnitzel. It's huge, you know. So I tend to, the chicken breast comes in like a teardrop section, and the tail is the end that comes to a point. I cut the tail off, so that's one piece that's sort of all one thickness. And then the fatter end of it, I then cut that in half horizontally, and that gives me 3 pieces of almost equal thickness. It usually comes out to pretty consistent size that way. And then I can cook it at a pretty even rate, yeah, especially if I'm doing it in the oven. I tend to do chicken breast just stovetop in a skillet, and then I finish it with a lid on it. Keeps it really nice and juicy and tender in the middle, and then I don't have to turn the oven on and get my kitchen all roasty hot like it is right now.
Yeah. Great, thanks.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So while this is cooking, I've got about 10 to 12 minutes that I want to prep my vegetables, but that's one of the reasons why I got a lot of it cleaned in advance, so that now all I have to do is cut some stuff up, and that's fast for me, and it's going to be easier for you the more you guys practice. Really quickly, I hold the knife as close to the blade as I can just for safety, to make sure that this hand is always in a claw, so that my first knuckles are bent back and my fingertips are safe and out of the way. I'm just going to cut the end of that carrot off and discard that to the side for now. Carrots are odd to dice. I'm not asking for you to make like perfect cubes out of a carrot. Restaurants that do that are using a lot of food waste. You know, they cut off all the sides and square it off, and that's not necessary. So I'm just going to cut that in half. The wider end, I'm going to cut in half and then in quarters. And then this skinnier end, I'm just going to cut in half. So we're getting sizes that are fairly the same and consistent, which means they're going to cook about the same rate, which is important. And then I'm just going to go down across those cuts into a dice. And I've got chopped carrot. And I'm only doing one. I'm only one person. I don't need a lot. You can increase this recipe as much as you need to. The carrots and the celery are going in for the base flavor. Carrot, celery, and onion are part of mirepoix, which make up the trifecta of standard flavors in all French cooking. So they just make a really good savory underlying flavor when they're combined well. So you do a little less celery than carrot, and then a lot more onion than both of those. There is definitely, like, I guess, a technical ratio, but it's personal. I don't like celery as much as maybe other people, but it's always, I think, 2 parts onion, 1 part carrot, 1 part celery, but I just always do a little bit less celery. Personal preference. Cutting an onion. I cut it in half, leaving that hairy root end attached. I want to make sure that that stays attached the whole time. And then I'm going to cut the other end off, which makes it easier for me to peel it. Discard. And I can get my finger in there and peel off that first layer of onion. Still making sure that that root end with the hairs are attached. That's what's going to hold it together for me while I chop it up. Getting all of this outer layer off. A lot of the time, onions are thrown away because people think that they're totally bad, but if you just take off the first layer, they're usually pretty good. So don't throw away food unless you're absolutely sure. Okay, get rid of all these little papers. So onions, keeping my hand flat and all my fingers safe. I'm going to hold this down and then cut horizontally into the onion, not going all the way through. I want to still leave that root end attached all the way. So now I sort of have this little Pac-Man of an onion. And then using the lines that already exist on the onion, I'm going to cut down into it. Again, not all the way back into the onion. I'm leaving about a half a centimeter from where my knife ends to the root of the onion, so that it all still holds together. So this root is holding all of this together, even though it's cut all up into like bloomin' onion style. So then I just go across that cut, and I've got diced onion. Okay. Well, that is going to discard. This other half of onion I'm just going to slice, because I kind of want sliced onion so that it looks the same as the fennel. I just think it's pretty. This onion is going to break down nicer when it gets all cooked up, so a combination is nice. So for slicing, I can remove that root, and then again, you're just going to follow those lines and just slice down into the onion, keeping your finger in that claw. You see, when I get to that point in the middle where it's going to be really difficult to go like awkwardly around the other side of the onion, I turn it around and then go in from the other side until I meet my first cut right there in the middle. And then you've got nice evenly sliced onion. Then I need to slice my fennel. Fennel is part of the anise family, the licorice family. It's very, very mild in flavor compared to other things in the licorice family. Like, it's not nearly as strong as the spice anise seed or anise, and it's definitely not as strong as like candy licorice or black licorice or anything like that. So it adds a lot of really nice, subtle, sort of spring, fresh flavor to food. And it's very unknown to a lot of Americans, so much so that I think in the 80s in a bunch of the Star Wars movies, when they were choosing props and set deck things to use at one of the alien restaurants, they had a bunch of fennel as alien food because people didn't know what it was. And they're like, oh yeah, that looks like alien food, cool. But it's fennel and it's really good and it's delicious and I'm sure it is good for you.
I'm embarrassed to say that I've never really used fennel before. That's how alien it is. And when I was kind of looking up, like, what are some of the benefits of fennel, right? It's a really good source of vitamin C. Once again, the immune system, right?
Yes.
And so, yeah, so I was like, wow. And it's an excellent source of potassium, which is great for blood pressure. So who knew?
Excellent. So the fronds, it usually comes very long. It has very, very long stems attached and they look like this, all frondy, kind of like dill. I just cut those off because it wouldn't fit in my fridge. But I didn't cut them all the way off because these fronds are totally edible and they add a really, really, really nice, delicate, fresh flavor. So I want to save those and use it as a garnish because why not? So I'm going to end up cutting that part off, and these thicker stem pieces I am going to set off to the side. I might use that in a soup, but these nice, beautiful little fronds. Can I show you up close? Yes, very pretty. So we're going to use that as a garnish on top of the chicken later with some of this parsley and the lemon zest. So I didn't want to discard it completely. So then you're left with this bulb. The bulb is the part that we're going to be using. You want to cut off the end. It's a very thick root piece. You just cut that off right at the end. Very thick. Get rid of that. It's not pleasant to eat. And then you want to cut it in half. I usually go the long way, not through the wide way. Like cut it lengthwise. And then you can see there's a core in here. That core is also, can you see that? The core in the middle here is not very pleasant. You can cook it down, and if you cook it down a lot, it can tenderize enough to eat. But it's, I'm going to cut most of the thick part of the core out. Some of it's okay, but I'm going to cut most of that out. And to do that, I just stand it up and hold it carefully. And then using my knife, I cut a triangle down into where the core meets the root bit there, and then I just tear it out. And that's like the thickest, hardest part. It's not fun to eat that. So then you're left with that sort of like a chopped out, wedged out fennel bulb. I'm going to do that to both sides. Okay, and then I'm just going to slice across. You can slice it this way, you can chop it into dices. I kind of like the way that it looks when it's chopped across because then you get, oh, chicken timer. I'm just gonna finish this really quick. I like the way it cuts across because then you get these like half moon rainbow cuts, and I just like the way that that looks when the dish is finished up. Chop it all the way through those little stems. All of that is edible. Do the second piece. Okay, so fennel, onion, celery, carrot. The only thing that we still have left to cut is our garlic, but that timer went off, so I'm going to check the chicken really quick just to make sure. You probably have noticed I don't use oven mitts. A lot of chefs don't. Doesn't mean that they're bad. They're just a little cumbersome. They're hard to get in and off when I'm trying to get back and forth to the other jobs that I'm doing. And they're not very sanitary. Like, I cook a lot, and because of that, the inside of those gloves would probably be gross, and they would end up building up, and they're hard to wash. It's just sort of clean, dry towels. Very important that they're dry. If you touch something hot with a damp towel, oh, you will really hurt. You'll get one of the worst burns. Please don't do that. Make sure that if you're gonna use a towel, clean and dry. So I want to just check the chicken. It's looking pretty good. This is a heavy pot. I'm gonna bring it on up here. The best way for me to know without cutting into it and ruining how beautiful it is to use my thermometer.
If you do have a thermometer, you want to check to make sure that it's calibrated correctly. I did this earlier. I boiled a pot of water. You bring it up to a rolling boil, which we know here at basically sea level is 212 degrees. So I tested it once it was at a rolling boil, made sure that my thermometer read 212. It came up and held that temperature, so I know my thermometer works. So I'm going to stick it into the meat. I want to avoid the bone. The bone is going to throw off the reading of the temperature. It has its own temperature. It conducts heat differently than the meat does. So you want to stick this into the fattest part of the chicken thigh, just into the meat. And you want to get it right into the meat and then stop, right into the middle. So you can imagine that that sharp tip of the thermometer is right in the middle of the meat. If you push it all the way down, you're going to be taking the temperature of the pan, which is also going to be a different reading than what the inside of your chicken is. So this is already coming up to 160 degrees, which already at 161. There's something called carryover cooking. When you're cooking anything and it's going to stay hot, it's probably going to keep cooking for 3 to 4, sometimes 5 degrees. It depends on what it is. It might continue cooking, which is why some chefs, when they're making things that they want to be really nice and rare, you kind of undercook it and then let it rest, and it usually finishes in the time that it needs to sit. So I'm already at 165 and it's still going to 166. So I know that I'm already done, which is fantastic. Plus it's already going to sit. So that is great. I'm going to, using a new pair of tongs now, take this chicken off onto this platter. Now this is a trick, especially if you have other people around you when you're cooking, but it's definitely helpful when you're doing this for yourself. I know that I have burned myself more than once when I bring a pan out of the oven and then I forget that that pan was in the oven and it's not just a pan on top of my stove. Because a pan on top of the stove, you can grab the handle, you can kind of move it around a little bit. It's not nearly as hot, but this is about 500 degrees because it was just in that crazy wicked hot oven, which I'm now going to turn off because we no longer need that. So what I do as a trick is I leave the towel on the handle of the pan. Can you all see that? And then if I were to walk away and someone else were to come up and think about moving that pan over, they know that this pan is really hot. And then it's a nice subtle trick to tell myself, like, oh, right, don't touch that. So that's just a good thing to remember to do, especially if you have anybody else that might come into your kitchen, heaven forbid children or something, and they accidentally touch anything. So it's a helpful trick. It's like okay, so I've got this platter ready. I'm going to put my chicken right onto here to set it aside. I don't want it to get cold. We did all that work of getting it crispy and nice and juicy and hot. So I'm going to put it on this spot on my oven that stays hot. And I think everybody has a place on their oven towards the back usually that it kind of keeps things hot. Like once the oven has been on for a while, the back area is going to keep things pretty hot. I've learned that. It might be a different spot on your oven or in your kitchen, but wherever you're going to keep it the warmest without it having to overcook anywhere. Okay, so we use these tongs just for our cooked chicken, so we know that they're okay. I'm going to just set them here off to the side. Looking at the amount of chicken fat that's in here, it's a little much based on how much fat I want to put into my body, but I do want some of it for all of the delicious flavor and to start sauteing my vegetables. So I have this glass jar. I'm just going to pour a little bit of it off very, very, very carefully, not holding that jar in my hand where I could possibly burn myself. Just pour a little bit off. I want to keep about half of what was in there, and I definitely don't want to scrape away any of that good stuff at the bottom. All of those bits and pieces, it's called fond, F-O-N-D. When you sear something, especially meat, in a pan or a skillet, and you get that, all that flavor, all that stuff, it's called the fond. The fond is like gold. You never want to get rid of that when you're cooking. That is flavor. It's so delicious. It's all caramelized and cooked down and reduced on itself. Some of the herbs and the spices from the chicken got really bloomed in seasoning, and that's the good stuff. And that's how people make gravy. That's how people make pan sauces. That's where you get a lot of flavor.
Yeah, so don't ever get rid of the fond. People fight over the fond in restaurants. It's delicious. So we're gonna turn this back on, but we're not gonna get it rip-roaring hot because it was already rip-roaring hot in the oven. So I'm gonna turn it to about medium. That's gonna keep it at a good high heat, but I don't wanna burn all of this stuff that's in here. So all of these things are going to go in at the same time, and the fact that we haven't finished the garlic yet, I remember, is fine because the garlic is going to go in a little bit towards after this stuff has cooked down a bit. The carrots and celery and onions and fennel need to cook a little bit longer. We want to give them a little bit more time. The garlic, if we get it in there too long at too high of a heat, it could scorch, and then we've ruined the garlic and everything will start to taste a little burned. So fennel, onions, celery, and carrots just going right in. I'm just going to bring the cutting board right over here so I'm not dealing with a lot of back and forth, and I just scrape it all right in there.
What I love about this is you're using those things for seasoning, right, and flavor, but they're also offering so many great nutritional components, right? They're high in fiber, antioxidants, beta carotene for the carrots, which is another great immune fighter. So yeah, adding flavor, but also just really high nutritious food.
Yeah. Yeah, the combination of vegetables and spices and herbs, it's an almost infinite amount of combinations you can make of flavor and textures and how things all go together. If you roast them, if you braise them, if you saute them, everything can turn out a little bit differently. And just those things, vegetables, spices, and herbs, are all good. Literally nothing bad about any vegetable, spices, or herbs, unless you have a particular dietary concern, obviously. And if you cook it for yourself, rather than getting like pre-mixed stuff or restaurant stuff, then you're in control of how spicy it is, or especially how salty it is, or which favorite herbs you're using, depending on what you might have in your pantry or not. If you really don't like white wine, make this with red wine. It's going to taste a little bit different, but it's going to be amazing. It's, don't be afraid to play around with different ideas, but using those base ideas of as many vegetables, as many whole grains, and as many spices for flavor and herbs and stuff like that, that you can't really go wrong when you're playing around with your food in the kitchen if you are using good stuff. So you saw I added all that in. I've got my handy high heat rated spatula. I use these because I can really scrape the bottoms and the sides really well. So the vegetables, as they cook in that chicken fat, they start to help release a lot of the stuff on the bottom of the pan. We want to get that fond up. It's going to now kind of season and coat the vegetables that are in here, and it's all going to just become a big pot of love, which is fantastic. We are going to let that get really high now. I want to turn that all the way up because I want to start to caramelize the vegetables. We want to get a second fond built up. We want to get that veggie flavor really, really, really deep and rich. So to do that, we cook this down a fair amount, and it doesn't take very long. Meanwhile, I am going to finish that garlic. So I cut the root end off because that's just unpleasant to eat. Not inedible, but it's kind of woody. Don't really love it. And then I'm going to smash this using the flat side of my knife, and that releases the paper pretty immediately. You can just pop it right out. Peeling garlic is one of the more tedious and annoying things that you can do in a kitchen. So that's a helpful little trick. Crush it, and it should pop right out. So I've got 3 small cloves here. That's not an exact measurement just because garlic cloves are all different. The recipe says, what did I write? 2 cloves garlic sliced. So that's if you're dealing with an average medium-sized garlic clove. These are pretty small, so I went with 3. And I'm not going to mince them. I'm not going to crush them up. I just want to slice them. So I want to weigh them out across, and then I'm just going to slice straight across the width of the garlic. And sliced garlic is just a little bit nicer to look at. It
doesn't matter. If you have a garlic press, you can use that. If you like minced garlic or you have a jar of garlic or any of that, perfectly fine. So now that this is cooked for a little bit, I'm gonna add the garlic into this. And then I'm gonna mix that all together. Oh yeah, okay, so the veggies are starting to caramelize. They're starting to stick to the pan just a little bit, which is great, because now we're gonna deglaze. We're gonna really get all of that fond off the bottom of the pan. A little bit of this white wine. You don't have to use wine if you wanna make it alcohol-free. You can absolutely just use the chicken stock to deglaze and to cook, fine. I'm just gonna do a little tiny bit of this. And that starts to sizzle pretty well, and before it cooks away, which will happen quickly, you want to really stir it up and scrape the bottom of the pan, because that little bit of liquid that you just added is what's going to get those bits and bobs to release from the pan. So once you've gotten it deglazed and everything is now soaked back up into the vegetables, there's no more wine in there, everything has evaporated, and it keeps cooking. We are going to add our orzo pasta. The recipe calls for a half a pound of orzo. This bag is 1 pound. I'm just going to do, not going to measure, I'm just going to pour about half of it in there. And there's no liquid in here. You might be like, what the heck is she doing? This is called purling. You can do this with rice or other grains. When you cook pasta or grain in fat without liquid first, it's called purling the grains. Then what you're doing is you're toasting them a little bit. It gives them a little bit nutty of a flavor, especially with this kind of pasta. And it kind of colors, it gets some color to some of them. You get toasted grains. Some of them will actually turn a little bit more of a golden brown. And that helps when you cook in the process, especially with rice, to keep your grains from sticking. So if you want to make a nice rice pilaf, which is traditionally very loose, it's not sticky rice at all, very loose grains, you purl the rice a lot in advance. Like you cook the grains separately in a little bit of oil and then add the liquid, because yeah, it just keeps it from sticking. There's lots of different reasons why. For this, especially with orzo pasta or couscous pasta or farro, that grain works really well like this. You want to get that nutty flavor built up, and so toasting the grain builds up that flavor first. Okay. So that is going, that is ready. Now I'm gonna do my chicken stock. The recipe calls for 2 cups. If you can find low sodium chicken stock, that's always the best way to go. If you wanna replace this with vegetable stock, perfectly fine. If you can't find either, because some stores are still really difficult, then water. Perfectly fine. You've built up so much flavor in this pan that water would still be fine. I was lucky and I found some chicken stock at the local bodega. Honest to goodness, some of those little mini marts have been saving me in terms of staples.
Yeah, the broth has been kind of hard to find.
Yeah.
And if you are concerned with sodium, blood pressure issues and that type of thing, yeah, the low sodium broth is great, or even diluting your broth, either regular or the low sodium even. You can do half water, half
Yeah,
soup.
that's a really great tip. That's a great tip. So you notice I didn't pour all of it in. I'm going to be doing 2 cups eventually. But like I said earlier, we're cooking this kind of risotto style. So I'm going to pour in liquid. I'm going to stir that around. You can't really walk away from this part of the process. And then as that liquid absorbs into the pasta, it's gonna cook itself into it like a risotto. I'm dropping carrots. Once this batch of the liquid has been absorbed, then I add the next batch. This process of cooking it this way, it kind of builds up the natural starches and it makes it a little creamy without using extra fat or cream. So that was the first cup. Gonna let that cook in and soak into the pasta. You definitely want to keep stirring through this process. It is very much like risotto. There are restaurants that make like 40-gallon stock pots of risotto every day, and they stir them with what look like oars to a boat, like canoe oars, these giant things. And it's usually the lowliest man on the totem pole that has to stand there and stir it for the next 3 hours while it cooks down, adding one ladle of stock at a time. Luckily, we don't have to do that. This is much faster, much easier process. That batch already has absorbed because I've got it on a good high heat and I'm stirring it often. That's going to help it cook into the pasta really quickly. So I'm going to do my next about half a cup. Let that cook in. Meanwhile, while this little batch cooks, I'm going to very quickly get some of these herbs and some of our garnish ready, because once this comes together, it's going to be done. And we've got about 10 minutes or so left. So this is coming together. If anybody does have any specific questions, go ahead and ask or type them in if we can, because then we can make sure that we get to them before anybody has
type
to
them in the
leave.
chat, then I can pass them on to you,
Okay.
Julia. Yeah, so type anything in the chat.
Okay, that was my third, almost last batch of the stock that's gone in. It's cooking out really well. You can tell when the pasta has definitely started cooking because it doesn't look that raw yellow anymore. It starts to look opaque, and then eventually it will start to look more like a cooked noodle, in that same sort of yellowish cooked color that traditional pasta tends to take on. As you do this, you're definitely looking for it to start looking thicker. The starches from the pasta are cooking out into the stock because we're going at such a high heat. And the stirring often is what kind of breaks it down and keeps it absorbing quickly, which then also keeps it thickening itself up. Okay, I'm going to pour in this last batch. This is nicely absorbed. Perfect. So on a really high heat, that's just going to cook itself down. And we want to let this cook down until it's thick. And obviously the pasta is cooked. That's the most important thing, which we will be able to test using one of our handy dandy tasting spoons that we have over here. These are the times, just little pro tips as I go along, that when I have a few minutes or even just 30 seconds, I do a little bit of cleaning. Most of this stuff is a pretty simple process. I'm going to, in the end, have my one platter, my one cast iron skillet, and some tools to clean up, which is not really that hard. The cast iron skillet is even easier to clean because I mostly just wipe it down and re-season it, ready for the next time. Cast irons are a gift, but I definitely recommend, if you have one or you're going to buy one, there's some really amazing tutorials on YouTube about how to care for them and treat them and make sure that you're seasoning them and taking care of them properly. Even if you have one that you think is a goner, if it's covered in rust or spots or stains and you think there's no chance, there are tutorials about how to fix those. You can sand them down, you can grind them, some of that rust away, you can use rust remover, you can clean them and then re-season them and start all over again. So don't throw them away. They're really valuable and good. But if you don't have one, then I personally, and this, I don't work for them, I'm not getting paid, but the Lodge brand skillets come pre-seasoned, ready to go in the oven. They have 10-inch, 12-inch, and more. And they're the simplest and most sort of user-friendly. So that's the one that I would recommend if it's your first go at a cast iron skillet. So this is going to cook down. It's almost there. While that's happening, what was the note that I had? We are going to finish with the lemon juice and put the chicken back in here so that it all cooks up together and any of those chicken juices from the platter get mixed back in, because that was flavor that we created. We don't want to lose it completely. So I've got one lemon that I already used part of. We're going to use that for the juicing. And then I've got this nicer looking lemon that we're going to get some zest from here. Got a microplane, which I talked about earlier. Microplanes are a wonderful, fun tool. They can be scary. They're very sharp. So the teeth go one way. Just watch where your knuckles are. Be careful of where your fingers are. I hold mine on the cutting board. Let me move the herbs so you can see. I hold it on the cutting board with one hand, and then I use the lemon and scrape away from me. And I hold it from the top of the lemon so that my knuckles and my fingers are as far away from those teeth as possible. That is a cut you don't want to get. And then you just scrape it across the microplane. You don't want to go deep into this lemon. You want to just get that outer layer of yellow zest. The inside, the deeper you go into what we call the pith underneath in that peel of the lemon, that's bitter. So the further you go and the more white it becomes, it will make your food taste bitter, not that delicious fresh lemon thing that we're going for. So I just scrape once on each spot and then move to the next spot and then scrape down and away from me. Very conscious of where my fingers and my knuckles are because of memories and past experiences. And I go all the way to the end. You don't want to really waste this lemon. Got a lot of good zest all the way around it, all the way through, and we get our money's worth and our flavor. And you just kind of slam it on the board, and that releases all of the zest from the underside. And so we've got this really fresh, aromatic pile of zest we're going to use as a garnish. Oh, I wish you could smell that. Okay, so this is ready. I can see the liquid has evaporated. Oh, it's nice and thick. Looks creamy with no cream, which is, I mean, it doesn't look white, but that kind of thick consistency where it's really goopy and starchy and delicious. So I'm going to get the chicken back in here. And I'm not really worried about where it goes, but I kind of want to move the orzo over and get the chicken onto the pan a little bit, just so that then the orzo can kind of start to nestle the chicken in, and it gets all loved together. That's all in there. Like I said, I'm going to use these juices that had come out of our chicken just because that's all flavor and it's really good. Be careful though, if you have been keeping your platter somewhere where it's hot like I was, the platter will probably be hot. So use a towel, you can use a pot, use an oven mitt or something if you have it. Just be really careful. So I just want to make sure that the orzo is still not sticking too much. Get all that chicken nestled down in there. I'm going to squeeze a little bit of this lemon juice. Now, one of my earliest chef instructors said, you don't need all of that mumbo jumbo in the kitchen. Your hands are the best tools that you ever got. I just squeeze lemons with my hands. Then I can filter the seeds out, and then I can tell if I have a paper cut or not. But you also can use like a bar squeezer if you have one of those. They're really helpful, handy tools. If you have a juicer, you can make fresh lemon juice and then pour it in. But again, hands are really the best tools that you can have in a kitchen. Just make sure that you've washed them lots, which I have. And I'm going to squeeze this over. I hold the lemon up, not down. If I held it down, then all the lemon seeds would just come pouring out through my fingers. I wouldn't really be able to control the situation. If I hold the lemon facing up and squeeze it, the juice will still come out, but the seeds stay in my hand in an upward, they're still facing up. They haven't been squeezed down into the pan. So I'm going to squeeze that entire half of a lemon in here. This is a lemon fennel chicken dish. We want a really good amount of this fresh lemon flavor. I didn't cook the lemon in there the entire time because that can tend to get bitter. I like to use lemon as a finish, especially when it's going to be a lot of lemon. Then it's really nice and bright when you put it on at the end. So that lemon is completely squeezed out, and I have a paper cut. Okay, I'm gonna wash.
I think the lemon too, once again, it brightens the flavor. It just really intensifies the flavor, which is fabulous. You don't have to put in a lot more salt or anything like that. Once again, a great source of vitamin C, which is super important for immune health. And also the citric, like we talked about, can increase not only how much iron it goes into the food from the pan, but also how well you absorb the iron.
Nice. Okay, so I'm turning the heat off. This looks beautiful and done to me. I am going to give it a little taste the only way that you know your food is delicious is by trying it. You don't want to serve it to people before you give it a taste. Obviously, that would be horrible. Plus, this is the chance that I have to adjust any seasoning. If I think it needs a tiny bit more pepper or any of those things, then this is the time I can fix it. You don't want to serve it and then realize it's not done. Okay. This is really good. I definitely don't want to add any more of the salt and pepper. We use such a small amount of that, but it doesn't seem like it's missing anything because it has so much flavor from the herbs, the paprika, and mostly the veggies that we cooked out. That fennel and then the addition of the lemon is so bright and fresh. This is, especially now we're moving into later spring and beautiful sunny weather. This is a perfect dish. It's actually going to be maybe even better the next day when all the flavors have really soaked into each other. And I love to have cold chicken as like a picnic dish. And you can't do much outside, but put out a blanket in your living room and have a picnic with your family. Things like that are how we're going to get through all this, right? So I'm going to just finish this with a little bit of these parsley leaves. And if you want a little trick of how to remove leaves quickly, you hold them by the stem and you take your sharp knife and you drag it across the leaves. Okay, so I'm just going to drag it across the stem of the parsley, and that removes most of the thick bottom stems, and I'm left with mostly nice leaves. If there's still a few stems, you just kind of pick those off. But I'm left with parsley leaves. I'm going to just kind of layer those on. We don't want to forget our awesome fennel fronds, which are really beautiful and so much fresh flavor. And then I'm going to top all of that with some of this lemon zest. Okay, let's see. I think, can you see that?
Looks amazing.
Yay. I'll take a still photo and I'll post it on our Instagram so you guys can get like a really good close-up view of what that ends up looking like. And I'm really not lying. I wouldn't toot my own horn. It's a delicious dish that is, gosh, it's refreshing. It makes me feel like I'm eating something that is good for me. So, and in less than an hour, ready to go. Ta-da!
Awesome, Julia. That was fantastic. And you just taught us so many great tips too, which was really fun.
Thank you. Well, and I didn't know all of that stuff about the things that I put in there. So I'm so happy that not only is it delicious, but it's immune boosting, especially right now when we need that more than ever.
Any questions, anyone?
Okay. Well, thank you for being here. If you do think of anything, or if you try to make this for yourself and you can't remember something, or the recipe doesn't make sense, or you want to ask me about a substitution, or you have any questions about nutrition about any of these things, then you can always reach out to the Teaching Kitchen on our Instagram page. You can find us at the Fitwell website. There's lots of different ways of reaching out to us. So don't hesitate. If you have any questions, or if you're cooking other things, even if it's not this dish and you're just like, oh my gosh, what do I do? We're here for you, okay? So tell other people too. We're going to be doing more of these quick little lessons. I have nothing better to be doing from home, so I might as well cook with you all. So I really appreciate you being here for our first class and sticking through until the end.
Thanks, Julia. That was wonderful.
Oh, we have a chat. Oh, thank you. Thanks, everybody.